My stepson said I'd never be more than an ATM. I froze his cards and sold the car still in my name. His attitude changed overnight, but too late. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. Josh once looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never be a real person to me, only an ATM." It was late. The house was quiet except for the dull hum of the fridge, and I had been trying to talk to him about responsibility, about the way he was burning through money like fire through dry grass. I had hoped for a conversation, maybe even a little understanding. Instead, I got those words. They weren't shouted, not even spat out in anger. He said them flatly, with a smirk, like a truth he had rehearsed and was now unafraid to deliver. That was it. That was the breaking point. My patience, years in the making, cracked clean in two. There was no fight left in me. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't beg him to see me differently. I stood up from the table, turned, and walked to my office in silence. He probably thought he'd won, that I had no comeback, that I was too weak to respond. But weakness wasn't what held my tongue. It was clarity. By the next morning, his credit cards were frozen. The car in the driveway, the Ford Fusion he bragged about to his friends like it was proof of his independence, was listed online. Within 2 days, it was sold. When he discovered what I'd done, the smirk he wore like armor slipped from his face. He shouted, demanded, cursed. But beneath the rage, there was fear, the dawning realization that the ground he had strutted on all these years was never his. It was mine, and I had just pulled it out from under him. I am a 46-year-old man from Texas. My life hasn't been easy, but I never complained. I grew up on dirt roads and long shifts, learned the value of sweat before I even finished school. When his mother walked out on us, on me, on Josh, I could have turned my back. She wasn't my blood, and neither was he. I could have let them both drift back into the chaos they seemed born from. But I didn't. I stayed. I stayed because I believed in duty, because I thought love was more than blood, because I told myself that even if the boy wasn't mine, I could raise him as if he were. I thought I could fill the void his biological father left behind when he vanished like a shadow at sunset. So I worked. And God, did I work. 12-hour days at the plant, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I picked up every overtime shift offered. I worked holidays while other men slept in with their families. My vacations? They never existed. The money I could have used for myself, for a trip, for a hobby, for a moment of peace. It all went to Josh. Every cent, every sacrifice. I covered his schooling when grants fell short. I paid for trips he begged his mother to approve. I kept him in clean clothes, nice shoes, the kind that made him fit in with the kids whose parents didn't live paycheck to paycheck. Every birthday, every Christmas, I made sure he didn't feel the absence of his real father. I built a life around him, step by painful step, until he had everything a boy could want. I gave him a childhood I never had, and in the process I erased myself. I didn't hunt. I didn't fish. I didn't go out with friends. My guitars gathered dust. My tools rusted in the shed. My body aged twice as fast under the strain of endless shifts. But none of that mattered because I told myself it was for him. For Josh. For the boy who, one day, would look back and say, "He wasn't my blood, but he was my father." That was the dream. That was what kept me alive when the nights grew long and lonely. But instead of gratitude, instead of even a shred of respect, I got that smirk, that sentence, that dismissal. "You'll never be a real person to me, only an ATM." Do you know what it feels like to be erased? To be told, after decades of sacrifice, that you are not a man, not a father, not even a human being, just a machine spitting out money? It's not anger that hits first. It's emptiness. A hollow, ringing silence in your chest. The realization that everything you've poured out, every hour of sweat, every dream you buried, every dollar you earned, meant nothing. Less than nothing. I stared at him that night, trying to recognize the boy I had raised. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, running behind him until my legs burned while he laughed and wobbled and finally found balance. I remembered the nights I stayed up with him while he had nightmares, telling him the dark couldn't hurt him because I was there. I remembered the pride in his eyes the first time he brought home a test with an A, and how he hugged me without thinking, before pulling away as if it had been a mistake. I remembered all of it, and none of it mattered anymore, because in his eyes, I was nothing. So I decided to show him what nothing looked like. I froze the accounts. I sold the car. I cut the flow of money that had carried him like a river all his life. And I didn't explain. I didn't justify myself. I let him discover it piece by piece, like a man walking through a house that's slowly collapsing, realizing too late that the foundation was never his. The day he found out, he stormed into my office, shouting. His face was red, twisted with outrage. "You can't do this. That's my car. My money." I looked at him calmly. "No, Josh, none of it was yours. It was mine, and I decided to take it back." His mouth opened, but no words came out. He stared at me like I was a stranger, like he couldn't comprehend that the man who had always bent, always given, always said yes, had finally said no. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth hung heavy enough. That night, after the storm of his anger passed, I sat alone in the dark and thought about the years behind me. I thought about the man I had become. Not a husband, not a father, not even a man with a life of his own. Just a provider. A ghost who existed only to keep others alive. And I thought about how quickly he had burned it all to ash with one cruel sentence. I realized something then, something that should have been obvious long ago. Sacrifice means nothing without respect. You can bleed yourself dry for someone, but if they see you as nothing more than an ATM, you will die a stranger in your own home. That night I poured myself a drink, stared at my reflection in the dark window, and whispered the truth I had been afraid to face. I am done being used. Josh didn't know it yet, but the breaking point had already passed. The boy I raised was about to meet the man I truly was. Not the ATM, not the servant, not the ghost. But the man who finally decided enough was enough. The change began quietly, like a hairline crack in glass. Josh had just turned 18, the age when boys think they've swallowed the world whole. At first, it was nothing I hadn't expected. A sharper tone here, a mocking joke there, comments about how I was old school, how I didn't get how things worked now. I brushed it off as teenage arrogance. Everyone says kids go through that stage, pulling away, testing boundaries. I thought maybe it was normal, maybe it was even healthy. But then came Trevor. Trevor was the kind of friend every parent dreads. Unemployed, self-righteous, always sneering at anyone who dared to live a life with structure or discipline. He had no job, no plans, no responsibilities, and yet he walked around as though he had solved the riddle of existence. He fed Josh's ego like poison, whispering about how the world was changing, how men like me were relics, how real freedom meant rejecting authority and living on your own terms. From that moment on, the respect was gone. Josh stopped seeing me as the man who raised him. He started seeing me through Trevor's eyes. Outdated, boring, irrelevant. A man whose worth could only be measured by the money he provided. I still tried to reach him. God knows I did. One evening after work, I cooked dinner. Steak, potatoes, the kind of meal he used to love as a kid. I set the table, lit a candle, thought maybe, just maybe, a quiet meal could bring us together again. He walked in, saw the plates, and laughed. "What would we even talk about?" he said, dropping into his chair with that smug grin. "You're old and outdated. Your time's over." Then he laughed louder, right in my face. I sat there, fork frozen in my hand, watching the boy I had raised mock me like I was nothing more than a punchline. The laugh wasn't playful, wasn't careless. It was deliberate, a dagger twisted slowly. That was when I knew this wasn't teenage rebellion. This was who he had chosen to become. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling. Every interaction became a performance, an opportunity for Josh to demonstrate how little he cared for me. He would joke about my work, sneer at my clothes, mimic my voice when his friends were around. He had once called me Dad without hesitation. Now, he couldn't even bring himself to say my name without lacing it with contempt. His mother, God help her, stayed silent. She'd wince at his tone, shoot him a look, but she never truly defended me. Maybe she thought it wasn't worth the fight. Maybe she thought I was strong enough to handle it. Or maybe, and this thought ate at me in the dark, maybe she agreed with him. I noticed the small acts of defiance first. Leaving dirty dishes on the counter after I'd cleaned the kitchen. Ignoring my requests until she repeated them. Walking past me in the hallway without a word, as though I were invisible. Then it grew bolder. He would invite Trevor over without asking. They'd sit in the living room, laughing loud, making jokes that I was the landlord of the house, not family. Sometimes I'd catch phrases floating through the walls. He doesn't matter. He thinks he's in charge. Wait until I'm out of here. Each one was a nail in the coffin of the bond one had sacrificed so much to build. I tried to fight it, tried to talk to him like a man, explain respect, responsibility, the weight of choices. But the more I spoke, the more he smirked. Words slid off him like water on stone. The breaking point of the stage came one night when Trevor was over again. They sat on the couch, video game controllers in their hands, junk food wrappers littered on the floor. I walked in and asked if they could clean up after themselves. A simple request. Josh didn't even look at me. He smirked, elbowed Trevor, and said, "See what I mean? The landlord's always nagging." They laughed. At me. In my own house. Something inside me twisted that night. I remembered the boy who used to run into my arms when I came home from work. The boy who once fell asleep on my chest because he was too scared of the thunder outside. The boy who used to look at me with trust, not contempt. That boy was gone. In his place was someone who had no memory of sacrifice, no gratitude, no respect. Just arrogance, fueled by the approval of a deadbeat friend and the silence of a mother who refused to intervene. It was then I realized, Josh didn't just see me as outdated. He saw me as disposable. And in that realization, something hardened inside me. I had spent years believing that patience could heal anything, that love could fill the gaps left by absence and betrayal. But now I understood the truth. Patience without respect becomes permission, and love without boundaries becomes slavery. I was done being a slave. It didn't happen in anger. It happened in silence. For weeks after the laughter, after Trevor's poison and Josh's mockery, I carried myself like a man walking through smoke. Every insult clung to me, but instead of lashing out, I began taking inventory. Step by step, I looked at the life I had built for him, the life he thought belonged to him, and I saw the truth laid bare. It was all mine. Every thread, every brick, every dollar mine. His credit cards, issued in my name. His phone, on my plan. The insurance that let him drive without fear, paid from my account. Even the car in the driveway, the Ford Fusion he bragged about like it was proof of his independence, was mine. Registered to me, insured by me, fueled by me. And he had the audacity to tell me I was nothing more than an ATM. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't waste my breath. I let him believe I was powerless while I quietly planned his reality check. It was a Sunday morning when I made the final move. Josh was upstairs, music blasting, talking loudly on the phone with Trevor about where they'd go that day. I heard the laughter, the cocky edge in his voice, and I walked outside to the driveway. The car keys were already in my pocket. The Fusion sat there gleaming in the sun, a monument to his arrogance. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and drove it away without a sound. By the time he came downstairs, ready to show off to his friends, the driveway was empty. The scream he let out rattled the windows. "Where's my car?" I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, calm as still water. "Sold it." He froze, staring at me as though I had just confessed to murder. "What do you mean, sold it? That's my car." I set my cup down, slow and deliberate. "No, Josh, that was my car. My registration, my insurance, my money. And I decided I was done funding your little kingdom." The explosion came fast. He shouted, cursed, slammed his hands on the counter. He called me controlling, toxic, insane. He accused me of ruining his life, of sabotaging his future. I listened, quiet, patient. Then I reached into my pocket and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was his frozen bank card and a bus pass. "Welcome to adulthood," I said. Figure it out. The silence that followed was sharper than his screams. He ripped open the envelope, stared at the bus pass like it was an insult carved into stone. His eyes darted up to mine, wide with disbelief. You can't do this. You can't just cut me off. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. I can. And I did. Because you told me I was nothing but an ATM. And an ATM doesn't drive you to school, doesn't put food on the table, doesn't keep a roof over your head. It just gives money. Now the ATM is closed. He stood there trembling, the reality sinking in. His entire life, the clothes, the car, the endless flow of spending had been propped up by me. Without me, he was just another 18-year-old with no job, no savings, and no plan. That afternoon, he called Trevor. I heard the panic in his voice through the thin walls. He sold my car, man. He cut me off. Can you pick me up? I don't know what Trevor said on the other end, but I know this. By the next week, Trevor wasn't around as much. Friends have a way of disappearing when the free rides and easy money vanish. Josh tried to fight me at first. He yelled, he begged, he even tried guilt. He accused me of not loving him, of betraying him, of proving I was never his father. I let the words fall. They couldn't cut me anymore. Because the truth was, I had finally cut him off. Not just from the money, but from the illusion that he was untouchable. He wanted adulthood. He got it. He wanted independence. Here it was raw and cold. And as he stared at the bus pass in his hand, realizing the world no longer bent to his arrogance, I saw the first crack of humility in his face. The smirk was gone. For the first time in years, Josh was silent. The silence in the house after I sold the car was different. It wasn't peace. It was tension, thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm. Josh stomped around upstairs, doors slamming, his music rattling the walls, but the swagger in his step was gone. For the first time in his life, he didn't have wheels, didn't have a line of money running straight into his pocket. And for a boy who had built his entire identity on convenience, it was like stripping him naked in front of the world. The fallout came quickly. Within a week, his so-called friends, the ones who used to pile into his fusion, ride on my gas, eat my food, laugh at me behind closed doors, drifted away. At first, they offered excuses. I'm busy, man. Maybe next time. Then they stopped answering altogether. Without a car, without money, Josh wasn't the leader of the pack anymore. He was just another broke teenager stuck on the bus route. I watched it happen with a cold kind of detachment. Part of me wanted to gloat, to tell him this was exactly what real life looked like, but I kept my mouth shut. Silence was more powerful than lectures. When the money dried up, so did his arrogance. He tried to hold on to it, tried to sneer, but every day it slipped a little further. The first time he asked me for cash, I said no. The second time, I pointed at the bus pass. By the third time, he didn't bother asking. He knew. It didn't take long before he came home with a job application. Part-time work at a grocery store across town. Nothing glamorous, minimum wage, long shifts, a manager who barked orders without caring who you were. I could tell he hated every second of it. But he did it. And that's when I started to notice something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. It began with small things. He started cleaning up after himself without being told. He came home with tired eyes, dropped his shoes at the door, and for once didn't leave a trail of mess behind him. One evening, he even brought me a coffee from the store. Cheap, bitter, lukewarm by the time it reached me, but it was the gesture that mattered. Thanks, he mumbled, almost embarrassed. It was the first time in months I'd heard the word without sarcasm. Still, I didn't let myself soften. Respect once lost doesn't return with a single cup of coffee. It has to be rebuilt, brick by brick, and some foundations are too cracked to ever hold weight again. His mother noticed the change too. She looked at me across the table one night, her eyes tired but softer than they'd been in weeks. Maybe this was what he needed, she said. I didn't answer, because the truth was I didn't know. Josh was learning the basics of responsibility, yes. But the old trust, the belief that he saw me as more than a provider, more than an ATM, that was gone. Shattered the moment he looked at me and said those words. Some nights I sat alone, staring into the dark, and asked myself if I'd been too harsh. If maybe I should have waited, given him more time to grow. But then I remembered the smirk, the laughter, the contempt dripping from his voice as he told me I was nothing. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I had been too lenient for too long. Now the line was drawn. I never wanted to be cruel. I never wanted to be the man who cut his stepson off, who sold his car, who forced him onto the bus. But I realized something in those weeks. If I hadn't drawn the line, he would never have seen me as anything but a machine built to serve him. And machines don't get respect. They get used until they break. So I broke the cycle first. Even now, with the house quieter, with Josh slowly learning how to stand on his own 2 feet, I carry that truth heavy in my chest. The boy I raised will never look at me the way I once hoped he would. And maybe that's the real cost of sacrifice. Not the hours, not the money, not the years you give away. The real cost is accepting that sometimes, no matter how much you pour into someone, they will never see you for who you are. Josh is working now. He's riding buses, counting hours, feeling the sting of a paycheck that barely covers his wants. Maybe it will shape him into a man. Maybe it won't. But one thing is certain. He will never again see me as his personal ATM. I made sure of that. And as I sit here now, looking back at the wreckage of what we once called a family, I ask myself the only question that matters. Was I wrong? Or was this the only way left to teach him that respect has a price, and I was done paying it?